The name Ava, like a curse, was never mentioned in the house again. I looked at Alex with a pained heart, but I knew he needed time to heal, to find himself after being betrayed by the person he loved. I didn't blame him because I understood that love can get to people, making them vulnerable and weak. But I also knew that our family had to rise from the ashes, to rebuild and become stronger than before. I continued to care for Leo as I had since Maya left, trying to fill the void that her absence had created. I cooked his favorite dishes, like cheesy pasta or a soft pudding, trying to give him back a sense of security and comfort that he had lost. As I worked, I couldn't help but think of Alex and the pain he was going through, and I knew that I had to be patient and let him heal at his own pace. I was determined to hold our family together, to support Alex and Leo through this difficult time, and to help them find their way again. But who really healed Leo's soul? It wasn't me, but Lucy, my adopted daughter. Every morning, she would carefully prepare his lunch for school, carefully choosing foods without shrimp or anything that could put him in danger. She would even write a little note for the teacher explaining Leo's allergy, along with a smiling face drawn with a crayon, which he loved. "Aunt Lucy, you draw so well," Leo would exclaim when he opened his lunchbox, and I would see his eyes light up, as if a part of his innocence had returned. Every afternoon, Lucy would take Leo to the nearby park. I used to watch them from a distance, seeing how she taught him to fly a kite, showing him how to hold the string so it would fly high. Once Leo fell off the slide, and Lucy ran to him, picked him up, brushed the dust off his clothes, and whispered, "It's okay, my love. I'm here." Leo's clear laughter echoed, a sound I thought I had lost forever, and which was now like a balm for my heart. I looked at Lucy with infinite gratitude, because she was not only a sister to him, but also like a second mother, filling the void that Maya had left. One night when Leo had a high fever, I saw Lucy spend the night by his side. She sat on a chair next to the bed, placing damp cloths on his forehead while she quietly told him the story of a brave sparrow that flew through a storm. I stood at the door, watching in silence, and I realized that Alex's gaze followed Lucy for a long time. It was a complex look, full of gratitude and emotion, as if he was realizing something he had ignored for a long time. I didn't say anything. I just sat in silence, giving them their space. But in my heart, I began to hope that maybe there was a light at the end of our family's dark tunnel. One night, during one of the rare dinners, where we were all sitting together, around the table, with the warm pasta I had prepared, Leo suddenly looked up, his clear eyes fixed on Lucy. "I want Aunt Lucy to be my mommy," he said in a soft but clear voice, as if it were something he had been thinking about for a long time. Everyone at the table fell silent. Lucy blushed and lowered her head, gripping the spoon as if to hide her embarrassment. Alex froze with teary eyes, as if Leo's words had touched a very deep chord in his heart. And I smiled. I put my hand on Alex's shoulder and said in a warm voice, "True happiness, son, doesn't come from a dazzling wedding dress, but from a sincere heart that knows how to love." Alex looked at me, then at Lucy, and I saw a small spark of hope shine in his eyes. Time passed, and Ava disappeared completely from our lives, like a toxic wind that had gone. Leo became a happy boy again, always stuck to Lucy with his favorite toy car and the drawing she made for him. I saw him running and playing in the yard, feeling a great relief, but also a pang of pain, thinking about everything he had to go through. One day, Alex took Lucy's hand, and he suddenly stood in front of me in the living room and said in a trembling but firm voice, "Mom, I know I made a mistake." He looked at me with tears in his eyes, and I could see the remorse and regret in his expression. Lucy stood beside him, her hand still held in his, and she gave me a gentle smile, as if to say that everything would be okay. I looked at them, and my heart swelled with emotion, feeling a mix of sadness and hope. Alex took a deep breath and continued, I was blind, Mom, and I didn't see the harm Ava was causing. I'm sorry for putting our family through all that pain. I felt a lump form in my throat as I looked at my son, seeing the genuine remorse in his eyes. I wanted to reach out and hug him, to tell him that I forgave him, but I waited for him to finish what he had to say. He paused, collecting his thoughts, and then said, I promise to be more careful, to be more aware of the people around us, and to always put our family first. I looked at Lucy, and she nodded in agreement, her eyes shining with tears. I took a deep breath, feeling a sense of closure, and said, I forgive you, Alex. We all make mistakes, and it takes courage to admit them. I smiled, feeling a sense of hope for the future, and said, let's move forward, together, as a family. Alex smiled back, relief written all over his face. And Lucy squeezed his hand, and the three of us stood there, united, ready to face whatever came next. I was blind, and my ignorance had put Leo in danger, a burden that weighed heavily on my conscience. But this time, I didn't want to let go of the person who had truly been by our family's side through thick and thin. Lucy lowered her head, her cheeks flushed with emotion, but I caught a glimpse of a radiant smile on her lips. I nodded, the movement barely perceptible, as tears silently rolled down my cheeks, a testament to the depth of my feelings and the relief that washed over me. Son, the only thing I want is for you and Leo to be happy, I said in a choked voice. That night, after Leo fell asleep, I sat by the window, watching the silver moon that stretched over the quiet street. Its soft light was like a reminder that although our family had gone through dark days, light always finds a way to break through. I whispered to myself, family isn't always made of blood ties, sometimes it's chosen with love and courage. After that beautiful wedding, a new chapter full of light had truly begun for my family. I looked toward the yard, where the kite that Lucy and Leo had flown the day before was still there. And I knew that although the old wounds might never fully heal, we would continue on together with love and strength as our support. After going through all this, I understood something very important. That in life, there are losses that cannot be replaced, betrayals that break the heart, but sincere love will always be the light that illuminates the way. Family is not only built with blood ties, but also with choices, with the courage to protect each other from darkness and danger. It is sacrifice and true affection that bring lasting happiness, not false appearances. I want everyone to remember to listen carefully to one another. You have to let your heart guide you, because sometimes a small gesture of attention can save a life. And it is kindness that gets us out of nights that seem to have no end, reminding us that the power of love and compassion can overcome even the most daunting challenges. The story you have just heard has been modified in names and places to protect the identity of the people involved. We do not tell this to judge, but with the hope that someone will listen and stop to reflect. How many mothers are suffering in silence inside their own homes? I truly wonder, if you were in my place, what would you have done? Would you have chosen silence to maintain peace? Or would you have dared to face everything to reclaim your own voice? I would like to know your opinion, because every story can become a candle that lights the way for others. God always blesses us, and I am sure that courage will lead us to better days. Meanwhile, on the final scene, I will leave you with two of the channel's favorite stories. I am sure you will be surprised, as I have been preparing for this moment my entire life. My name is Gloria, and I have a secret that I have kept hidden for far too long. It is a secret that will change everything, and I am not sure if you are ready for it. As I stand here, my heart is racing with anticipation, and my mind is filled with thoughts of what is to come. I look around the room, and I see my friends, Jack and Sarah, who have been by my side through thick and thin. They have no idea what I am about to reveal, but I know they will be there to support me no matter what. With a deep breath, I begin to speak, my voice trembling with emotion. I have something to tell you all, I say, my words hanging in the air like a challenge. I was sitting quietly at the table next to my 7-year-old grandson at my son's second wedding. Suddenly, the boy grabbed my hand tightly and whispered, "Grandma, I want to leave right now." I asked him, "What's wrong?" He trembled and replied, "Grandma, you didn't look under the table, did you?" I slowly lowered my gaze and froze. I took my grandson's hand and we got up in silence. "I'm so glad you're here." As I watched my grandson's carefree movements, my mind began to wander back to the past, to the events that had led me to this moment of quiet contemplation. The wedding of my son Alex to his second wife Ava was a grand affair, with friends and family gathered from all corners of the world. I had always been a bit skeptical of Ava, with her charming smile and her calculating gaze, but Alex seemed to adore her, and that was all that mattered. My little grandson Leo was the light of my life, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride and responsibility as I watched him grow and learn new things every day. The soft glow of the candles and the gentle hum of conversation created a warm and intimate atmosphere, and for a moment I felt at peace. But as I glanced around the room, my eyes met those of Ava's sister, Gloria, and I couldn't help but feel a shiver run down my spine. There was something about her that didn't quite add up, something that made me feel like she was hiding secrets behind her bright smile. I pushed the thought aside, focusing instead on the happy couple and the joy that radiated from them. But as the night wore on and the music began to play, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, that a storm was brewing just beneath the surface of this perfect, polished facade. And then, just as I was starting to relax, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. A small, almost imperceptible gesture, a fleeting glance between Ava and her sister, a look that spoke of secrets and lies and a deep-seated hatred. My heart began to pound in my chest as I realized that my son's new wife was not what she seemed, and that my family was in grave danger. His clear eyes seemed immersed in a world of his own, where the noise of the adults around him didn't exist. I looked at him, and my heart softened. I carefully straightened the tiny bow tie at his neck, a gesture as gentle as if I were caressing the memory of his mother, Maya, whose every tender smile I still remember as if it were yesterday. The soft melody of the jazz band filled the room, blending with the murmur of conversations and the clinking of wine glasses. The ballroom was decorated with impressive luxury, with arrangements of pristine white roses on every table, and the candlelight reflected on the gleaming silver plates. I looked up, searching for Alex. He was busy going from table to table, toasting to thank the guests with a radiant smile that seemed to want to hide the emptiness I knew he still carried in his heart since Maya left. In the distance, Ava, my son's new wife, stunning in her beaded wedding dress, posed for photos with her friends. Her smile was perfect, without a single cloud, as if the whole world belonged to her. I looked at her and felt something strange in my chest, a weird sensation, but I tried to ignore it, telling myself I was just being overly sensitive. As I continued to observe the scene, I noticed Alex making his way towards me, his eyes locking onto mine with a hint of sadness. And I couldn't help but wonder if he was truly happy for his son and Ava. The music started to play and the guests began to dance, but I remained still, lost in thought, trying to understand the mix of emotions that were swirling inside me. Ava's laughter echoed through the room, and I turned to see her spinning around the dance floor, her beauty and joy captivating everyone's attention. Meanwhile, Alex stood beside me, his eyes fixed on the happy couple, a forced smile on his face, and I knew that he was putting on a brave front, trying to hide the pain that still lingered in his heart. I placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, trying to offer some comfort, and he turned to me, his eyes searching for something, perhaps a sense of understanding or a glimpse of hope. In that moment, I felt a deep connection to him, a sense of empathy that transcended words, and I knew that I had to be there for him, to support him through this difficult time. As the night wore on, the celebration continued, but I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was off, that beneath the surface of happiness and joy, There were underlying currents of sadness and longing that threatened to disrupt the harmony of the occasion. Waiters moved gracefully between the tables, serving more wine, clearing empty plates, and arranging the napkins. An elderly couple sitting at our table turned to me with a kind smile. "How fast Leo is growing up," they said. "How old is he now, Betty?" I smiled and replied in a soft voice, "He just turned 7. Time flies." Then I turned to cut a small piece of cake to give to Leo. The boy looked up, his eyes shining with gratitude, but he immediately lowered his head again and continued pushing his toy car, as if only that toy was the place where he felt safe. Suddenly, Leo stopped. His little hand stopped pushing the car, and his round eyes looked at me with a seriousness that was not normal for him. His gaze was intense, and I could sense a deep emotion brewing inside him. I walked closer to him, cake in hand, and asked if everything was okay, but he just stared at me, his eyes searching for something. I knelt down beside him, trying to understand what was going on, and that's when I saw a tear roll down his cheek, his small body shaking with suppressed sobs. I gently put the cake aside and wrapped my arms around him, holding him close as he finally let out a deep cry, his tiny hands clutching my shirt. In that moment, I realized that there was more to Leo's silence than I had initially thought, and I made a silent promise to be more understanding and supportive of this little boy who had already stolen my heart. I was a little startled as a bad feeling spread throughout my body. He grabbed my hand tightly, his little fingers ice cold to the touch. In an urgent voice, he whispered, "Grandma, I want to leave right now." His eyes were wide with fear, and I could sense the desperation in his voice. I looked around, trying to understand what was wrong. But everything seemed normal. The room was quiet, with only the sound of the clock ticking on the wall. I turned back to him. "What's wrong, dear?" I asked, trying to reassure him. He pulled on my hand, his grip tightening. "Please, Grandma, let's go," he begged, his voice shaking. I could feel his fear, and it was starting to spread to me. I looked into his eyes, trying to understand what was happening. But he just shook his head. "I don't like it here, Grandma. I want to go home." His voice trembled, as if he were holding back a fear he couldn't explain. My heart ached. I leaned over him and put a hand on his shoulder. "What's wrong, my boy? Tell me what it is." Leo shuddered, pressing his lips together, his eyes welling up with unshed tears as he struggled to find the words to express the emotions that were tormenting him. His small body shook beneath my touch, and I could feel the tension radiating from him, like a living, breathing thing. I gently squeezed his shoulder, trying to reassure him that I was there, that I would listen, that I would help him through this darkness that seemed to be consuming him. Slowly, he turned to face me, his eyes locking onto mine, filled with a deep sadness and a longing for comfort. "I had a bad dream," he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. I pulled him into a warm hug, holding him close as he buried his face in my chest, his small body racked with sobs. "It's okay, Leo," I whispered, my voice a soothing balm to his frazzled nerves. "You're safe now. I'm here. Nothing can hurt you." And then he whispered so softly that I had to lean my ear close to hear him. "Grandma, you didn't look under the table, did you?" His words were like a cold knife that went through my chest. A terrible anguish began to grow inside me, making it hard to breathe. I tried to stay calm and stroked his hair, but his gaze, the panicked look of a boy of just 7, prevented me from ignoring it. "It's okay, my love." I held him tight, trying to reassure him, but my mind was racing with thoughts of what could be under the table. His small hands were shaking, and I could feel his heart beating rapidly against my chest. I took a deep breath and tried to calm myself down, but the sense of unease was growing by the second. Suddenly, I heard a faint noise coming from under the table and my heart skipped a beat. I looked into his eyes, and they were filled with fear and uncertainty. "What's wrong, my little one?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He looked up at me, and his voice was barely audible. "I think something is under the table, Grandma." "Let your grandma look," I said, trying to make my voice sound calm to soothe him, although I felt my own heart was pounding. Carefully, I lifted the edge of the white tablecloth and looked into the dark space under the table, where the wooden legs of the chairs and Leo's little shoes were swinging. And then I saw it. A small piece of paper, folded in four, lying there right next to Leo's chair. It was so small that it was almost lost in the darkness, but its presence chilled my blood. Leo huddled against me, his little hand gripping my arm as if seeking refuge. I felt his agitated breathing. Every tremor seemed to tell me that something was very wrong. I crouched down completely, and with a trembling hand, I picked up the paper. The people around us were still laughing and toasting, but at that instant, my entire world shrank until it was just me, Leo, and that damned paper in my hand. As I unfolded the piece of paper, the dim candlelight on the table was just enough to read the scribbled words. "Table 8, add shrimp to the child's serving." Those few words were like a direct punch to my heart, making me feel the blood turn to ice in my veins and the air get stuck in my chest. I stood there frozen as the reality of the situation hit me like a ton of bricks. My mind couldn't help but wonder what kind of person would write such a thing, and what their true intentions were. The candlelight seemed to flicker in sync with my racing heartbeat, casting eerie shadows on the walls as I tried to process the weight of those simple yet devastating words. Leo is severely allergic to shrimp, something my whole family knows perfectly well. A single piece of shrimp would be enough to put his life in danger. Who could have written this? Who could be so cruel? Right on my son's wedding day. I squeezed Leo's hand, feeling his little fingers tremble in mine. I stood up abruptly, not caring about the surprised looks from the people around me. The elderly couple nearby stopped talking and looked at me with concern. I hugged Leo with all my strength, as if I feared he would vanish if I let him go. The laughter and music continued, but for me, everything had become a heavy, suffocating silence. Memories of other times flooded my mind, taking me out of that gleaming wedding hall and back to the years when our family was whole. I once thought my son's home would always be filled with laughter, but life, like a sudden gust of wind, extinguished that flame of happiness, leaving me with scars that would never heal. I remember Maya, my first daughter-in-law, like I remember the morning sunlight streaming through the window at dawn. Her smile was tender and warm. She always made me feel like I was in the arms of a true daughter. Maya never raised her voice, never did anything that worried me. Her presence was a soothing balm to my soul, and I cherished every moment we spent together. As I think back, I recall the way she would listen to me with utmost attention, her eyes sparkling with kindness and understanding. Maya's gentle nature had a profound impact on our family, and I felt grateful to have her by our side. Her love and care for my son were evident in the way she supported him, encouraged him, and stood by him through thick and thin. I remember the countless times she would surprise me with small gestures of affection, like bringing me my favorite tea or cooking my favorite meals. Maya's thoughtfulness and generosity knew no bounds, and I felt blessed to have her as a part of our family. Even now, as I look back on those happy times, I am filled with a sense of nostalgia and longing, remembering the joy that Maya brought into our lives. She was one of those people who just by looking at them made you feel at peace. I still remember those very windy afternoons in the suburbs of Phoenix, when I would arrive at Alex and Maya's little house. The laughter of Leo, who had just started to walk, echoed in the backyard as he chased a colorful rubber ball. Maya would be on the porch with a basket of freshly picked vegetables, smiling as she watched her son. "Mom, Betty, try the chili I made." The smell of simmering tomatoes and spices wafted through the air, enticing everyone to gather around the table. "Alex, with his warm and gentle smile, would put his arm around Maya, pulling her close as they watched Leo's antics. I would sit down next to them, feeling grateful for this little family that had taken me in as one of their own. As we sat down to eat, I would take a sip of the chili and nod in approval, her eyes twinkling with delight. The sound of clinking spoons and happy chatter filled the air, and for a moment, everything felt perfect. Maya would glance over at Leo, who was now sitting in his high chair, giggling as he tried to feed himself, and her face would light up with joy. Alex would reach out and ruffle Leo's hair, and the little boy would squeal with delight, his eyes shining with happiness. As the afternoon wore on, the sun would begin to set, casting a warm golden light over the backyard, and we would all sit back, content and full, feeling grateful for this little slice of heaven we had found in each other's company. "See what you think," she would often say to me, her voice full of pride as she placed the warm bowl in front of me. I would sit there, eating and talking with her about simple things, while Leo crawled on the floor, clinging to an old toy car. But the most beautiful, and also the most painful memory, is the night Leo became very sick. He had a very high fever. His little body burned and his eyes could barely open with no strength left, even to cry. Maya's hands were gentle as she held him close, trying to soothe his discomfort, and I could sense her worry and fear as she whispered softly to him. As the night wore on, Leo's condition only worsened, and my mother's expression turned from concern to desperation. She held him tighter, tears streaming down her face as she begged him to get better, to come back to us. I remember feeling helpless, sitting there watching as my brother suffered, my mother's anguish palpable in the air. The room was filled with an overwhelming sense of sadness, and all I could do was sit there, frozen in uncertainty, as the person I loved most in the world struggled to breathe. Maya held him while tears rolled silently down his cheeks. "Mom, Betty, I'm so scared," she whispered, her voice trembling. I sat next to her, taking turns to place damp cloths on his forehead, trying to calm him. "Don't worry, honey. Everything will be all right," I said softly, trying to reassure her. Maya's grip on him tightened as she gazed up at me with pleading eyes. "Please, Mom, make it stop," she begged, her small body shaking with fear. I stroked her hair, trying to soothe her, and whispered words of comfort in her ear. "It's okay, sweetie. I'm here for you. I won't let anything bad happen to you. Just breathe deeply and try to relax. I'll take care of everything." As I spoke, I gently rocked her back and forth, trying to calm her down. Slowly but surely, her trembling subsided, and she began to calm down. I could see the fear in her eyes start to fade, replaced by a sense of trust and security. "That's it, baby," I whispered, smiling reassuringly at her. "You're safe now. I've got you. The boy is strong. He's going to be okay." But inside, the worry weighed on me like a stone. I stayed up with Maya until dawn, when the first rays of sun appeared and Leo's fever finally broke, and he fell asleep in his mother's arms. Maya turned to me, her eyes red, but with a faint smile. "Thank you, Mom. Without you, I don't know what I would have done at that moment." I just took her hand and squeezed it tightly, as if I wanted to tell her that I would always be there for her and for Leo. I thought that this little family would be happy forever, like a song that never ends. But then, one fateful afternoon, everything fell apart. The phone rang while I was washing dishes in the kitchen. The cold voice of a police officer came through the line. "Miss Williams, we regret to inform you that there has been an accident." I don't remember how I finished hearing the sentence. The words blurred together as a wave of dread washed over me, making my hands tremble and water overflow from the sink. I felt a chill run down my spine as I tried to process what the officer was saying, my mind racing with worst-case scenarios. The officer's voice continued, but I couldn't focus on the words, my thoughts consumed by a growing sense of panic. Suddenly, the sound of my own voice surprised me as I asked, "What kind of accident?" The words hung in the air, and for a moment, there was silence on the other end of the line. Then, the officer's voice came back, slow and measured. "Ms. Williams, it's about your husband, John. He was involved in a car accident on the way home from work." The words hit me like a punch to the gut, taking my breath away and leaving me reeling. I felt like I was drowning in a sea of fear and uncertainty, unable to think or speak. The officer's voice continued, but I couldn't hear him, my mind numb and my body frozen in shock. I just know that my hands were shaking so much that I dropped a plate on the floor and it shattered. Maya was gone in an instant when a truck that lost control hit her car on the highway outside the city. I stood there paralyzed, feeling the world crumble in front of me. Maya's funeral was on a day of torrential rain. The drops fell non-stop, as if the sky was also crying for her. As I held Leo, who was only 4 years old then, in my arms, I could feel his confusion and fear as he looked at everyone with his innocent eyes, not understanding what was happening. "Grandma, where is my mommy?" he asked in his little voice, his words piercing my heart. I hugged him tightly, swallowing my tears, and whispered, "Your mommy is in a very beautiful place, my love." But inside I felt shattered, trying to hold back my emotions for the sake of my grandchildren. Alex, my son, collapsed in front of the coffin, his shoulders shaking, and he couldn't say a word, overcome with grief. I watched as he struggled to come to terms with the loss, his body trembling with each sob. Meanwhile, Leo continued to look up at me with his big round eyes, waiting for answers, unaware of the pain and sorrow that surrounded us. I took a deep breath and tried to find the words to comfort him, to explain the unexplainable, but all I could manage to whisper was, "You will be okay, my love. We will get through this together." I knew he was trying to be strong, but his gaze was empty, as if a part of his soul had gone with Maya. After that tragedy, Alex changed completely. He buried himself in work. He would leave home very early and wouldn't return until Leo was already asleep. I understood that he was running away, trying to fill that immense void in his heart with endless days of work. But Leo, my poor boy, suffered the most. He started talking less. His gaze was often sad, as if he was waiting for a miracle that would bring his mother back. I became his only support. I took him to school every morning and sat by his bed every night to rock him. "Grandma, tell me a story about my mommy," he would often ask me, and I would tell them to him in a choked voice, talking about the times Maya sang to him to sleep, how she cut his fruit into little pieces to make him his favorite dessert. Each story was an attempt to keep Maya's image alive in Leo's mind and in my heart. Lucy, my adopted daughter, also became an essential part of those days. With her warm heart and skilled hands, she would come to the house often, bringing coloring books or cookies she had baked herself. Lucy loved Leo as if he were her own little brother. She would carry him, teach him to read, or sit for hours with him at the table to help him with his clumsy drawings. "Look, Leo, your house turned out prettier than mine," she would say, laughing in her voice as clear as a bell. But sometimes I would catch Lucy looking at Alex when he entered the house in silence after a long day of work. It was a deep look that contained something more than a simple sibling affection. The way her eyes would sparkle with a mixture of curiosity and admiration whenever Alex was near made me wonder if Lucy's feelings for him went beyond an ordinary sisterly love. As the days went by, I noticed that Lucy would often find excuses to be around Alex, whether it was helping him with his chores or simply sitting next to him in silence. Her eyes fixed on his face with an intensity that was almost palpable. Meanwhile, Leo remained oblivious to the subtle undercurrents of emotion that seemed to be developing between Lucy and Alex, too caught up in his own little world of colorful drawings and childish wonder. As the sun began to set, casting a warm orange glow over the house, Lucy's gaze would often meet Alex's, and for a fleeting moment, it seemed as though they shared a secret that no one else could understand. I saw it, but I decided not to say anything. Maybe I was afraid that if I brought up the subject, I would break the fragile stability of what was left of our family. Alex's house slowly became devoid of laughter, and the sound of empty silence was deafening. But thanks to Lucy and Leo, the family flame remained lit, even if it was only weakly, a small spark that kept us connected and reminded us of happier times. As the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, I couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude towards Lucy and Leo, who had become the glue that held our family together, their presence a constant reminder that even in the darkest of times, there was still something to be cherished. Alex, though struggling to come to terms with the new reality, found solace in the company of Lucy and Leo, and their laughter, though occasional, brought a sense of comfort to the once warm and lively house. As I looked at Alex, I saw a glimmer of hope, a sense that maybe, just maybe, we could rebuild and create a new sense of normalcy, one that would be different from what we had before, but still filled with love and laughter, thanks to the unwavering spirit of Lucy and Leo. I did everything possible to keep that flame from going out. But in the depths of my heart, I knew that both Alex and I lived with wounds that had never healed. Every time I saw Leo sleeping, I saw Maya's features on his little face, and my heart would ache again. The memory of that afternoon is still as clear in my mind as if time had not passed. I was sitting in my small living room, listening to the sparrows singing in the yard, with a heart full of mixed feelings. As I looked out the window, I felt the warm sunshine on my skin. But it did not bring me the comfort I was longing for. The silence between Alex and me had become a heavy burden, and I knew that we needed to find a way to break free from the pain of our past. I thought about the day we met, the way our eyes locked, and the spark that ignited between us. But life had taken its toll, and now we were left with the uncertainty of our future together. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm inside me, and wondered if we could ever find our way back to each other. The sound of Leo's gentle breathing reminded me of the love we shared, and I knew that I had to hold on to it, no matter how fragile it seemed. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the room, I felt a sense of resolve wash over me. I would do everything in my power to keep our love alive, to heal the wounds of the past, and to create a brighter future for us, for Leo, and for the love that had brought us together in the first place. It was the first time my son Alex was bringing Ava home to introduce her. I tried to open my heart. I tried to see this young woman through the eyes of a mother who wants her son to find happiness again after so much pain. But deep down, I couldn't shake a feeling of unease, like a cold wind that made me shiver. That afternoon, Alex arrived later than usual, and as I heard the door open, I took a deep breath, preparing myself to meet the person who had captured my son's attention. As they walked into the living room, I forced a warm smile, trying to hide the apprehension that had been building up inside me. Alex's eyes sparkled with excitement as he introduced Ava, and I could see the genuine affection he had for her. But as I looked at Ava, I couldn't help but notice the way she seemed a bit reserved, her eyes darting around the room as if she was trying to take in every detail. I tried to push aside my doubts and focus on making her feel welcome, but the feeling of unease lingered, refusing to be ignored. As we sat down to dinner, the conversation flowed easily, with Alex dominating the conversation, telling stories about his work and his friends. Ava listened intently, asking questions and laughing at all the right moments, but I couldn't shake the feeling that she was holding something back. As the evening wore on, I found myself glancing at her, trying to read her expression, but her face remained a mask of politeness, giving away nothing. And then, just as I thought the evening was going to end without any surprises, Alex dropped a bombshell, announcing that he and Ava were planning a trip, together, just the two of them. My heart skipped a beat as I felt a wave of panic wash over me, and I couldn't help but wonder what my son was getting himself into. I was in the kitchen preparing the tacos that Leo loves so much when I heard the door open. Alex came in with a strange glow on his face. His eyes lit up as they were in his youth, when he used to talk about Maya with a passion he couldn't hide. I stopped what I was doing and looked at him, feeling a bit of nervousness. My mind started racing with thoughts of who this person could be and why Alex was so eager to introduce them to me. I wiped my hands on a towel and walked towards him, trying to compose myself. "Who is it, sweetie?" I asked, attempting to sound calm. Alex took a deep breath and stepped aside, revealing a young woman with a bright smile and sparkling eyes standing behind him. "Mom, this is Ava," he said, his voice filled with excitement. I smiled and extended my hand, trying to make Ava feel welcome. "Hello, Ava. It's nice to meet you," I said, studying her face and trying to read the situation. Ava's eyes locked onto mine, and I could see a mix of nerves and enthusiasm in her gaze. I could tell that this meeting was important to Alex, and I wanted to make sure I made a good impression. "Come on in, Ava. Let's get to know each other," I said, gesturing towards the living room. Alex grinned and nodded, looking relieved that the introduction had gone smoothly. As we walked into the living room, I couldn't help but notice the way Alex looked at Ava with a love and adoration that I hadn't seen in a long time. It was clear that he was smitten, and I couldn't wait to learn more about this new person in his life. "Someone special?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. Alex smiled, a smile I hadn't seen in a long time. "Yes, you're going to like her very much," he said, full of confidence. I nodded, my eyes fixed on Alex's enthusiastic face. I wiped my hands on my apron, trying to hide the worry that was starting to grow in me. As I glanced away, I couldn't help but think about who this mysterious person could be, and why Alex seemed so sure I'd take a liking to him. The anticipation was building up inside me, and I found myself fidgeting with the hem of my apron, waiting for the moment when I'd finally meet this someone special. After Maya, I wasn't sure anyone to fill the void she left, not only for Alex, but also for Leo and for me. That night, Ava appeared. She entered my house in an elegant light blue dress, her hair perfectly styled in waves that framed her face, and her lips painted a soft red that curved into a smile. That smile, I must admit, was charming, as if she had rehearsed it to please anyone. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Miss Ava," I said, trying to sound calm and composed, but her presence had already caught me off guard, and I couldn't help but wonder what she was doing here and what her intentions were. As she approached me, her eyes sparkled with a warm and inviting glow, and I felt a strange sense of comfort in her presence, as if she had been a part of our lives for a long time. Alex, who had been quiet until then, suddenly spoke up, and his voice was filled with a mix of curiosity and caution. "Who are you, and what brings you here, Ms. Ava?" he asked, his eyes narrowing slightly as he waited for her response. Ava's smile never wavered, and she replied, "I'm an old friend of Maya's, and I've come to help you all through this difficult time." Her words were laced with a sincerity that was hard to deny, and yet I couldn't shake off the feeling that there was more to her story than she was letting on. Leo, who had been watching the exchange, finally spoke up, his voice filled with a sense of excitement and curiosity. "Really, what makes you think you can help us, Miss Ava?" he asked, his eyes wide with anticipation. And Ava's smile grew wider, as if she had been expecting this question and was prepared to answer it. Ava smiled warmly as she said, "Williams," her voice sweet and gentle, bowing her head slightly. I returned her smile, invited her in, and served her a cup of hot, aromatic coffee. "You have a lovely home," Ava said as her eyes scanned the family photos hanging on the wall, where there was one of Maya hugging a very tiny Leo. I nodded and thanked her, but her eyes lingered on that photo longer than I would have liked, and I wasn't sure if I liked that. Dinner went on in an atmosphere that I tried to make as friendly as possible. I placed the dishes I had prepared all afternoon on the table. Tacos wrapped in corn tortillas, a plate of enchiladas with red sauce, and a fresh salad with mango, Leo's favorite dish. Alex sat next to Ava, his eyes never leaving her. His happiness was visible in every gesture. "Mom, Ava works in marketing at my company." As we sat down to eat, the atmosphere was filled with warmth and laughter, and Alex couldn't help but gaze at Ava, his affection for her evident in the way he smiled whenever she spoke. Ava, with her bright smile and infectious laugh, seemed to bring out the best in Alex, and it was clear that he was deeply smitten with her. ... The sound of clinking dishes and conversation filled the air, and I couldn't help but notice the way Alex's eyes sparkled when Ava teased him playfully, her voice like music to his ears. As we passed the dishes around the table, Alex made sure Ava had a generous serving of her favorite salad, and she thanked him with a gentle touch on his arm, sending a flutter through his chest. The evening wore on, and the conversation flowed effortlessly, with Alex and Ava lost in their own little world, their connection growing stronger with every passing moment. "She's very good at what she does," he said, his voice full of pride. Ava smiled. "She served me an enchilada with a delicate but calculated movement." "Miss Williams, this is delicious." Her eyes sparkled as she replied, "I'm glad you're enjoying it, Mr. Thompson." He took another bite, savoring the flavors, and Ava couldn't help but notice the way he closed his eyes in appreciation. She refilled his glass with iced tea, her hand brushing against his as she did so. The touch sent a shiver down her spine, but she quickly composed herself, not wanting to make a scene. "Mr. Thompson, would you like some more enchilada or perhaps something else?" she asked, her voice steady and professional. As I began to explain the recipe, she listened intently, her eyes sparkling with interest, but I couldn't shake off the feeling that she was hiding something behind her warm smile. My grandson, Leo, remained silent, his usual enthusiasm for sharing stories about his day at school noticeably absent, and I found myself wondering what was bothering him. I continued to teach her the intricacies of the dish, trying to push aside my unease, but the air in the room felt thick with unspoken emotions, and I couldn't help but feel like I was caught in the middle of a delicate dance, where every step and every word had to be carefully considered. The way she laughed and joked with me, trying to put me at ease, only seemed to heighten my sense of unease, and I found myself stealing glances at Leo, who was still picking at his food, his eyes fixed on some invisible point on the table. As the lesson progressed, the tension in the room seemed to grow, and I couldn't help but wonder what secrets were being kept hidden behind the polite smiles and the friendly banter. I noticed that he was avoiding Ava's gaze, as if he was trying to hide in a safe zone. Ava leaned over, took a chocolate bar from his purse, and placed it in front of Leo with a radiant smile. "This is for you," she said, in a voice as sweet as if she were trying to win him over. But Leo remained still, his little hands gripping his silverware, and then he simply turned his face away without touching the chocolate. I saw a flash of fear in his eyes and felt as if my heart would sink. Alex frowned, about to scold his son. "Leo, what's wrong with you?" he asked, his voice firm but concerned. "Ava's giving you some candy," he added, trying to reason with the boy. I quickly intervened, not wanting the situation to escalate. "It's nothing," I said, trying to reassure Alex, but my eyes were fixed on Leo, who was still looking pale and frightened. Alex turned to me, his expression questioning, but I just shook my head, trying to convey that it was not the right time to discuss the matter. Leo, however, remained silent, his eyes fixed on the candy in Ava's hand, his face a picture of unease. "Here, Leo, take it," Ava said, her voice soft and gentle, trying to coax him into accepting the candy. But Leo just shook his head, his eyes welling up with tears. Alex's frown deepened, and he took a step forward, his hands on his hips. "Leo, what's going on?" he asked again, his voice, this time laced with a mix of frustration and worry. "He's probably a little tired. Leave him be, son." Alex sighed, but didn't say anything else and turned to serve Ava more wine as if he wanted to lighten the mood. Lucy, my adopted daughter, was also at dinner. She sat across from me, eating in silence, but I noticed how her gaze darkened when Ava took Alex's hand under the table. The atmosphere seemed to thicken, and I could sense a hint of jealousy emanating from Lucy, her eyes narrowing slightly as she watched the gentle exchange between Alex and Ava. Meanwhile, Alex appeared oblivious to the undercurrents, smiling warmly at Ava as he refilled her glass, his fingers brushing against hers in a tender gesture. Ava, too, seemed lost in the moment, her face aglow with a soft, romantic light, her hand lingering in Alex's as if she didn't want to let go. As the dinner wore on, the silence between us grew more pronounced, punctuated only by the clinking of silverware against plates and the occasional murmur of conversation, which only seemed to highlight the tension simmering just below the surface. Lucy has always been a very sensitive girl, and I know she loves Alex like a brother, but sometimes I wonder if that feeling isn't deeper. When Ava took Alex's hand, Lucy's hand stopped over the glass, and I saw her fingers tighten a little. She didn't say anything. She just lowered her head and continued eating, her eyes fixed on the plate in front of her. As I glanced at Lucy, I could sense the emotion swirling beneath her calm exterior. A mix of sadness, longing, and possibly even a hint of jealousy, all of which seemed to be simmering just below the surface, waiting to erupt. I wanted to ask him. I wanted to understand what was making him sad, but I knew it wasn't the right time. After dinner, Ava insisted on washing the dishes, even though I refused several times. "Miss Williams, let me help you," she said with overflowing enthusiasm. As I sat at the table, watching her, I couldn't help but notice the faint smile on her face, a stark contrast to the gloom that had settled over our gathering earlier. Ava's eyes sparkled with a warmth that put me at ease, and I found myself wondering what had brought her to this place, to this moment, where she was taking care of us with such gentle kindness. Meanwhile, I caught glimpses of him, his eyes cast downward, his shoulders slumped in defeat, and my heart ached to know what was troubling him, to be able to offer some solace, some comfort, but I knew I had to wait, had to let him come to me when he was ready. The sound of clinking dishes and the soft hum of the refrigerator filled the air, a soothing melody that seemed to calm the nerves. And as I looked at Ava, I saw a sense of purpose in her, a sense of belonging. And I wondered what secrets she held, what stories she could tell if only she would let me in. As the night wore on, the darkness outside seemed to press in. But inside, we had created a warm, cozy space, a space filled with the promise of connection, of understanding. And I felt grateful to be a part of it, to be surrounded by these people, each with their own struggles, their own stories, and their own secrets. I reluctantly agreed and watched her go into the kitchen, roll up her sleeves, and hum a cheerful tune while she cleaned. I must admit that she did everything impeccably. The dishes were neatly stacked and the sink was sparkling. For a moment, I thought, this girl seems very caring. But then, when I went out into the living room, I saw Leo sitting, coloring with his little hands clutching a crayon. Ava approached and sat down next to him, praising him. "You draw so well, Leo." "What is it? Let me see." But Leo immediately let go of the pencil and leaned back with an expression of distrust, as if she were a threat. Ava glanced at me and quickly forced a smile, as if to cover up the awkward moment. She tried to break the silence, her voice soft and gentle, asking Leo if he would like to show her his drawing another time. Leo simply shook his head, his eyes fixed on some distant point, his expression unreadable. Ava's smile faltered for a moment, before she recovered, her eyes locking onto mine, searching for a way to diffuse the tension that had suddenly arisen. I offered her a subtle nod, and she turned back to Leo, her voice filled with warmth and encouragement, telling him that his talent was undeniable and that she was eager to see more of his work. Leo's gaze slowly shifted, his eyes meeting Ava's, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw a flicker of curiosity, before his expression hardened once more, and he looked away, the silence between them growing thicker, like a fog that refused to lift. "What a shy boy," she said in the same sweet voice. The introduction ended with my son completely satisfied, seeing Ava off at the door with his eyes fixed on her as if there was no one else in the world. I stood there watching them walk away with a strange feeling in my heart, as if something wasn't quite right. Time passed, and Ava gradually became a part of our lives. One weekend morning, with the bright California sun flooding the living room through the windows, I was knitting a scarf when Ava appeared, smiling from ear to ear. "Ms. Williams, I want to take Leo to the park today. ... I looked up from my knitting, slightly surprised by her request, and replied, "That sounds like a great idea, Ava. But are you sure you're ready to take care of him on your own?" Ava's smile never wavered as she nodded enthusiastically, and I could see the excitement in her eyes. I put down my knitting and thought for a moment before responding, "Okay, but make sure to stay in the designated play areas and keep a close eye on him at all times." Ava nodded again, and I handed her a piece of paper with my phone number scribbled on it. "And don't forget to call me if you need anything." With a sense of reassurance, I watched as Ava took Leo's hand, and they walked out the door together, feeling a sense of hope that maybe, just maybe, things were starting to look up. "Is that okay?" she asked, her voice full of enthusiasm. I looked at Leo, who was on the floor playing with his wooden blocks, his face expressionless. "Of course, I'm sure he'd love it," I replied, forcing a smile. Even though I felt a little doubt inside, Alex had gone to work, and I thought maybe a little fresh air would do Leo good. Ava took Leo's hand and led him toward the door, while I watched them go with a strange heaviness in my heart. When they returned, Ava came in with a triumphant smile. She had so much fun, she recounted, her voice full of excitement. "He wouldn't stop going down the slide, and he even asked for another ice cream," she added. But when I looked at Leo, I saw that his shirt was dirty, with some dried dirt stains on the blue fabric that I had ironed myself that morning. He was silent, holding his toy car in his hand, without saying a word about his outing. "Did you have fun, my boy?" I asked, crouching down to stroke his hair. He just nodded slightly, looking away. I wanted to ask him more to know why he was so quiet, but Ava intervened with her always sweet voice. "I already told you, Ms. Williams, he loved it." Ava's words were reassuring, and I couldn't help but smile at her confident tone. I turned to my boy, trying to catch his eye, but he was still gazing elsewhere, his expression unreadable. Ava, however, was beaming with excitement, and I found myself drawn to her enthusiasm. I stood up, towering over the two, and placed a gentle hand on Ava's shoulder. "Tell me, Ava, what was his favorite part of the day?" I asked, my curiosity getting the better of me. Ava's face lit up, and she began to recount the events of the day, her words spilling out in a happy torrent. My boy, however, remained silent, his eyes fixed on some distant point, his emotions locked deep within. I nodded, but inside me, a small piece of the puzzle of doubt began to form. On another occasion, while Alex was at work, Ava showed up unannounced. I was in the kitchen preparing chili for lunch when I heard her talking to Leo in the living room. At first, her voice was soft, but suddenly I heard a harsh phrase. "Stay still, Leo." Ava's tone was firm and commanding, and I could sense a hint of warning in her words. I stopped chopping the onions and listened intently. My curiosity piqued. What was Ava doing here, and what was she talking to Leo about? I tried to remain calm and continue with my cooking, but my mind was racing with questions. I heard Leo's faint response, but it was muffled, and I couldn't quite make out what he was saying. Ava's voice rose again, this time with a sense of urgency. "Don't move, Leo, just stay where you are." I felt a shiver run down my spine as I wondered what was happening in the living room. The air in the kitchen seemed to thicken with tension, and I found myself frozen, unsure of what to do next. Alex was at work, and I was alone with Ava and Leo, and I had no idea what Ava's intentions were. The silence that followed was oppressive, and I strained my ears to hear any sound from the living room. Suddenly, I heard footsteps, heavy and deliberate, coming from the living room. Ava's voice was low and menacing, and I could sense her moving closer to the kitchen. I tried to compose myself, but my heart was racing, and my hands were shaking as I held the chef's knife. What was Ava planning, And how was I going to protect Leo and myself? As I stood there, frozen in shock, Ava's words cut deep into my soul. Anger and humiliation burned my face. "Don't make a mess," she had said, as if I was still a child who couldn't take care of myself. "You're a big boy now, but you still act like a baby." Her words echoed in my mind, making me feel small and insignificant. I stopped dead in my tracks, my hand still over the onion I was chopping, and a chill ran through my body. The kitchen, which had once been a warm and comforting space, now felt cold and unwelcoming. I came out of the kitchen, my heart heavy with emotion, and instantly Ava changed her tone, becoming as sweet as if nothing had happened. "Oh, Leo is so clever," she cooed, her voice dripping with saccharine sweetness. But I wasn't fooled. I knew that beneath her sugary exterior, Ava's words had been laced with venom, designed to hurt and belittle me. I felt a lump form in my throat as I struggled to hold back my emotions, my eyes locking onto Ava's, searching for some sign of remorse or apology, but finding none. "Look at the tall tower he built," she said, pointing to the wooden blocks the boy was playing with a radiant smile. But Leo just pressed his lips together and looked at me as if asking for help. I tried to smile and said, "Yes, he's very skilled," but inside the unease was starting to grow, like a small thorn digging into my heart. I tried to calm myself, thinking that surely she's not used to children, and that's why she didn't understand why Leo was behaving this way. Perhaps she didn't know how to interact with him, and that's why he was feeling uncomfortable around her. I took a deep breath and attempted to steer the conversation in a different direction, hoping to ease the tension that was slowly building up. As I glanced at Leo, I could see the uncertainty in his eyes, and I knew I had to do something to put him at ease. I gently put my hand on his shoulder, trying to reassure him that everything was okay and that he was safe. But despite my efforts, the unease continued to linger, like a shadow hovering over us, waiting to pounce and disrupt the fragile peace that we were trying to maintain. Anyone is a bit clumsy at first, but as the years pass, they grow and learn to navigate the world with more confidence. Leo's 7th birthday is a memory I will never forget, a day filled with joy and laughter that still brings a smile to my face. Lucy, my adopted daughter, spent all morning baking a chocolate cake, Leo's favorite, her hands moving deftly as she mixed and measured the ingredients with precision. When she arrived with the cake and placed it on the table with its candles lit, Leo shouted with joy, his voice echoing through the room. His eyes lit up for the first time in months, sparkling with excitement as he gazed at the cake, the flames from the candles dancing and flickering in the light. The love and care that Lucy had put into making the cake was evident, and Leo's reaction was a testament to the bond they shared, a bond that grew stronger with each passing day. As we sang Happy Birthday and Leo blew out the candles, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride and gratitude for this little family we had built, and for the memories we were creating together. "Aunt Lucy, this is my favorite cake," he exclaimed, running to hug her. She smiled, stroked his hair, and told him tenderly, "I made it for you, my love." Eat a lot. I watched them with a warm heart, feeling that the family flame was rekindled. Ava was also there, but she only clapped in a forced way, standing in a corner with a weak smile. As I watched the scene unfold, the only gift for Leo was an indifferent pat on the shoulder and a half-hearted happy birthday champ. I saw how Leo shrank a little, avoiding his gaze, and my heart ached again. I wanted to say something, but I stayed quiet, telling myself not to get too involved. Another time, Alex took Ava and Leo to the grocery store. I stayed home, but when they returned, I heard Ava complaining in an irritated tone. Leo's eyes dropped, and he looked even more dejected, which made my heart go out to him even more. A lack of enthusiasm and genuine affection from Alex was palpable, and it seemed to be taking a toll on Leo's already fragile self-esteem. Meanwhile, Ava was still ranting about something, her voice rising with each passing moment, while Alex just stood there, his expression a picture of apathy. It was as if he was completely disconnected from the emotional turmoil that was brewing around him, and it was both fascinating and disturbing to witness. Leo dropped a whole bag of candy at the checkout, and I had to pay for it. What a clumsy boy. Alex frowned and turned to scold his son. Leo, you're a big boy now. You have to be more careful. He looked at Leo with disappointment, expecting his son to take responsibility for his actions. Alex reminded Leo that they had talked about being mindful of his belongings before, and now it was time for him to put those words into practice. Leo looked down, feeling embarrassed and ashamed of his carelessness, and whispered a sorry to his father. Alex put a hand on Leo's shoulder, guiding him to pick up the scattered candies, and together they cleaned up the mess. I saw Leo lower his head with his hands intertwined, and his eyes sought mine as if asking for help. I quickly approached and put a hand on his shoulder. "Don't worry, my boy," I said softly. "It was just some candy." But inside, I couldn't stop wondering why Ava got so angry so easily with a child. Leo's eyes remained downcast, and I could sense the fear and confusion emanating from him. I gently squeezed his shoulder, trying to reassure him that everything would be okay. Meanwhile, Ava stood a few feet away, her arms crossed and a scowl on her face, seemingly still fuming from the incident. I shot her a concerned glance, trying to understand what had triggered such a strong reaction from her. Leo, however, slowly looked up at me, his eyes welling up with tears, and I knew I had to do something to comfort him. Why couldn't she be as gentle as Maya had been? One afternoon, when I went to pick up Leo from school, his teacher took me aside and said in a low but concerned voice, "Miss Williams, lately, Leo has been talking less and seems very withdrawn. Is something happening at home?" I froze, but I tried to downplay it. "I'm sure it's just the changes, Ms. Davis." The teacher's words struck a chord within me, and I couldn't help but think about the recent developments in our household. As I walked home with Leo, I noticed he was quieter than usual, his eyes fixed on the ground. I attempted to engage him in conversation, but he only responded with monosyllabic answers. When we arrived home, I decided to have a chat with him to find out what was troubling him. I sat down beside him on the couch and asked, "Leo, sweetie, is everything okay? You've been a bit quiet lately, and your teacher mentioned it too." He looked up at me with those big brown eyes, and for a moment, I thought I saw a glimmer of sadness. But then he just shrugged and said, "I'm fine, Mom." I wasn't convinced, but I didn't want to push him either. I gave him a gentle hug and said, "If you ever want to talk about something, you know I'm here for you, right?" He nodded slightly, and we sat there in silence for a while, watching the world go by outside our window. As the days went by, I made a conscious effort to spend more quality time with Leo, to get him to open up about his feelings. We started doing things together like baking cookies and playing board games. And slowly but surely, I began to see glimpses of the old Leo, the one who would chatter excitedly about his day and his friends. But despite the progress we were making, I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was still bothering him, something he wasn't telling me. And that's when I realized that I needed to have a conversation with his father to see if we could work together to find out what was going on with our son. I picked up the phone and dialed his number, hoping that he would answer, hoping that we could have a civilized conversation about our child's well-being. As I waited for him to pick up, I felt a sense of trepidation, wondering what the conversation would bring and whether we could finally get to the bottom of what was troubling our dear Leo. "Don't worry." But on the way home, Leo tugged on my blouse and said in a trembling voice, "Grandma, I don't want to go home with Miss Ava." I stopped and knelt down to look into his clear eyes, my heart feeling squeezed. "Why do you say that, my love? Miss Ava loves you," I said, but as soon as I said it, I knew I was wrong. Leo looked up at me with a worried expression, and I could see the fear in his eyes. "What is it, Leo?" I asked gently, trying to reassure him. He hesitated for a moment before speaking. "Grandma, Miss Ava is always yelling at me and making me feel bad." I felt a surge of anger and concern for my grandson, and I immediately knew that I had to do something to protect him. I took a deep breath and asked him to tell me more about what was going on at home with Miss Ava. As we walked, Leo told me about the way Miss Ava would scold him and make him feel unloved, and my heart ached with sadness and worry. I knew I had to talk to Miss Ava and find out what was going on, and I was determined to make sure that Leo felt safe and loved. Leo shook his head with firm determination in his gaze. "No, Grandma," he said, his voice filled with a mix of sadness and conviction. "She doesn't love me." I stroked his hair, trying to calm him, but inside I couldn't deny that the boy was telling the truth. Lucy, who was nearby, had heard everything, her eyes fixed on Leo with a deep understanding and compassion. She walked slowly towards us, her footsteps gentle, as if not to startle us. "Grandma," she said softly, "perhaps we should talk about this, try to understand what's going on." But Leo just shook his head again, his eyes welling up with tears. "I know, Grandma," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I know she doesn't love me, and it's okay. I just wish she would be honest with me, tell me the truth." I looked at Grandma, seeing the pain and concern etched on her face, and knew that we had to find a way to help Leo through this difficult time. She turned away in silence, but I saw how her shoulders moved slightly, as if she was holding back a sigh. All those loose pieces, all those little signs, I had seen them, but I had chosen to ignore them. And so the day of my son's wedding arrived. That afternoon, the golden sun of Florida steamed through the large windows, bathing the ballroom in a radiant light, as if wanting to celebrate my son's happy day. I was sitting at table number 8 next to my grandson Leo and Lucy, my adopted daughter. Leo was playing with his red toy car, whispering a soft vroom vroom. I looked at him, and my heart filled with tenderness. Lucy, in a simple beige dress, was sitting on the other side, leaning over from time to say something in Leo's ear, with a smile as sweet as the morning sun. "Eat another little piece of bread, my boy," she said, breaking off a small piece for him. I smiled at the sight, feeling a little comfort in my heart. Although our family had gone through so much pain, the presence of Lucy and Leo was always the fire that warmed my soul. Alex, my son, dressed in an elegant navy blue suit, was walking between the tables, toasting with relatives. His face was overflowing with happiness. His radiant smile seemed to want to ease the dark years that followed Maya's death. As I watched him, I couldn't help but think of his mother and how proud she would be of the man he had become. The room was filled with the sound of laughter and chatter, but my attention was focused on Alex and the way he seemed to be embracing this new chapter in his life. His eyes sparkled with a sense of hope and renewal, and I knew that he was going to be okay, that he was going to find happiness again. Lucy and Leo, his cousin and best friend, were by his side, supporting him every step of the way, and I was grateful for their presence in his life. Together, they had been through so much, and I knew that their bond would only continue to grow stronger. As I looked around the room, I saw the faces of our loved ones, all of whom had come to celebrate this special occasion with us. They were all smiling, and their eyes were shining with warmth and love, and I felt a sense of peace wash over me. For the first time in a long time, I felt like we were going to be okay, like we were going to make it through this difficult time and come out stronger on the other side. And as I watched Alex, surrounded by the people he loved, I knew that he was going to be the one to lead us there. I looked at him, feeling a mix of pride and sadness. I wanted to believe that he had found a new happiness, that Ava, the dazzling bride in her beaded wedding dress, would give him a new home. But every time my gaze met Ava's, who was laughing loudly in front of the cameras, never letting go of her wine glass, I felt a small thorn digging into my heart. Her smile was too perfect, like a carefully placed mask. The soft melody of the jazz band played, blending with the lively conversations of the guests. As I stood there watching them, I couldn't help but think of the past, of the memories we had shared, of the laughter and the tears. I remembered the way he used to look at me with a gaze that made my heart skip a beat, and I felt a pang of longing. Now, his eyes were fixed on Ava, and I was just a guest at his wedding, a reminder of a love that had faded away. The music stopped, and the guests began to applaud, cheering for the newlyweds. I joined in, forcing a smile on my face, trying to be happy for him. But deep down, I was still hurting. As the night wore on, I caught glimpses of him and Ava dancing and laughing together, and I couldn't help but feel like I was losing him all over again. The pain was still there, lingering in my heart, a reminder of what could never be again. I took a deep breath, trying to let go of the past, to move on, but it was hard, especially when the memories were still so fresh, so vivid. The night was coming to an end, and I knew I had to leave to let him start his new life. But as I turned to go, I felt a hand on my arm, and I turned to see him standing in front of me, his eyes searching mine. The waiters moved discreetly, serving appetizers, crispy cakes, and aromatic cheese dip. And waiters moving discreetly, serving appetizers, and an aromatic cheese dip, and plates of fresh shrimp, elegantly decorated. I noticed that Leo only took a cake and then carefully pushed the shrimp plate away. I frowned and asked him in a low voice, "Don't you like this, my love?" The boy shook his head, looking away as if he were hiding something. I wanted to ask him more, but a close relative interrupted, saying cheerfully, "And Leo is behaving well, Betty. Look how big he's gotten." I smiled and replied, "He's a smart little man now." But inside, I couldn't help but worry. Leo had never refused food in such a strange way. In the distance, I saw Ava's gaze tuned to our table. The smile on her lips seemed to tighten for a second, just enough for no one to notice, before she turned to continue toasting with another guest. I tried to dismiss my uneasiness, telling myself I was overthinking, but then everything changed in an instant. Leo, who was still playing with his toy car, pushed it too hard and the toy rolled onto the floor. The boy quickly crouched down to pick it up, but I saw him freeze, his eyes wide, fixed on something under the table. I leaned over to ask him what was wrong, when Leo pulled out a small piece of paper folded in four, with trembling hands and a pale face. He immediately clung to my hand and whispered urgently, "Grandma, let's go. Please, let's go now." My heart started pounding as if it wanted to jump out of my chest. "What's wrong, my boy?" I asked, trying to stay calm. But Leo's panicked look prevented me from doing so. Trembling, he repeated that question that chilled my blood. His eyes were wide with fear and his voice was shaking, making me feel a sense of dread wash over me. I grabbed his arm, trying to reassure him, but he shook me off, his gaze fixed on something behind me. I turned to see what had caught his attention, and that's when I saw it. A figure looming in the distance, its presence seeming to fill the air with an unspeakable horror. Leo's grip on my arm tightened, and I felt his nails dig deep into my skin as he whispered, "We have to get out of here, now." I didn't need any further convincing, and together we turned to run, our footsteps echoing through the darkness. As the figure began to move towards us, its pace slow and deliberate, but unstoppable. As I stood there, frozen in terror, Leo's voice cut through the silence, his words like a cold knife that paralyzed me. "You didn't look under the table, did you?" he asked, his tone low and menacing. I slowly crouched down, my heart racing with anticipation, and lifted the white tablecloth, my eyes scanning the dark space under the table. The little paper was lying next to his chair, a harmless object, but full of menace. I picked it up with trembling hands, feeling the world shrink around me, leaving only Leo, me, and that damned paper. I unfolded it, my fingers shaking as I smoothed out the creases, my eyes fixed on the contents, my mind reeling with the implications. The words on the paper seemed to leap off the page, accusing and condemning, and I felt my world crumbling around me. Leo's eyes were fixed on me, his gaze piercing and unrelenting, as if waiting for my reaction, his expression a mask of calmness that belied the turmoil brewing beneath. The candle light was enough to read the scribbled words. "Table, add shrimp to the child's serving." A few words, but they were like an electric shock that ran through my entire body. I subconsciously crumpled the paper in my hand. The music, the laughter, everything around me seemed to sink into an abyss from which I couldn't escape. Ava, in her dazzling wedding dress, continued to laugh in a corner of the ballroom, raising her glass to toast with a guest, as if nothing in the world could worry her. Alex was beaming with joy, taking photos with his coworkers and flashing a radiant smile that seemed to confirm that this was the happiest day of his life. But for me, everything in that ballroom was a facade, a curtain that hid the terrible truth I had just discovered. I squeezed the paper tightly, feeling it burn my skin. Leo, the grandson I loved more than my own life, had almost become the victim of an evil plot, right on his father's wedding day. My mind was racing with thoughts of how I could have missed the signs, how I could have let this happen. I glanced around the room, searching for any sign of danger, my eyes scanning the crowd with a sense of urgency. As I looked at Alex, laughing and smiling with his new wife, I felt a wave of anger wash over me. How could he be so happy when our family was in danger? I knew I had to act quickly, to protect Leo and uncover the truth behind the evil plot that threatened to destroy our family. I turned to Lucy, my adopted daughter, who was sitting next to Leo. Her eyes were filled with concern when she saw my expression. "Take care of Leo, please," I said, trying to stay calm, although I knew I couldn't hide the tremor in my voice. Lucy nodded, pulling Leo close to her and hugging him tightly, like a protective shield. "Where are you going?" she asked me in a low voice, but full of anguish. I just shook my head without answering because I didn't even know what I was going to do next. I quickly went out into the hallway, my legs heavy, as if they were carrying lead, but with my heart pounding, urging me to act. Near the bar, I saw a group of waiters chatting. Their laughter sounded like a painful contrast to the storm that was raging inside me. I recognized David, the young man who had bought food for our table several times. He had a kind face and a friendly smile, but at that moment, I couldn't think about that. I walked straight up to him, put the paper in his face, and asked in a firm voice, "Do you know who sent this paper?" David looked at the paper, and his face changed instantly. His carefree smile turned into an expression of panic. "My God, this is my paper," he stammered, his hands trembling, as if he wanted to snatch it from me. As I stood there, my mind racing with thoughts, I couldn't help but think of the woman who had given it to me. She had handed it to me with a warm smile, and I had been holding onto it tightly as I was carrying the tray, but accidentally dropped it when I was walking. His words were like a ray of light in the midst of confusion, but they also agitated me even more. "Who gave it to you?" I insisted, almost shouting, completely losing my composure. David took a step back, confused, his eyes wide with concern. "I don't know her name, ma'am," he replied, his voice soft and gentle. I felt a surge of frustration, anxiety, my heart beating faster as I tried to piece together the events of the day. Suddenly, a memory flashed before my eyes, and I remembered the woman's face, her bright blue eyes and curly brown hair. I was determined to find out who she was and why she had given me the mysterious object. I turned to David, my voice firm and resolute. "Tell me everything you know," I demanded. My eyes locked onto his. David hesitated, unsure of what to say, but I could see the wheels turning in his mind as he tried to recall every detail. "I was walking down the street when I saw her," he began, his voice slow and measured. "She was standing on the corner, looking around nervously, and then she handed it to you and quickly disappeared into the crowd." I listened intently, my mind racing with possibilities, as David continued to recount the events of the day. "She just told me to give it to the chef. The paper didn't say who sent it." Rage exploded inside me like a burning fire. "All the more reason," I said, getting close, my voice trembling with anger and fear. "You know, my grandson is severely allergic to shrimp. A single piece could kill him." David turned pale, his eyes wide with horror, and shook his head frantically. "Ma'am, I really didn't know," he said, his voice trembling with fear. "I just followed the note. I had no idea about anything," he continued, his words spilling out in a desperate attempt to explain himself. His eyes darted back and forth, searching for a glimmer of understanding as he repeated his plea of innocence. "I swear, ma'am, I didn't know what I was getting into," David exclaimed, his hands shaking uncontrollably as he tried to convey the truth. His voice broke, as if he too was trapped in this nightmare. The other waiters began to whisper among themselves, looking at each other with curiosity and concern. I squeezed the paper in my hand, feeling it burn my skin. I wanted to scream. I wanted to break everything, but I knew I couldn't let my emotions get the better of me. Suddenly, the lights in the room seemed to flicker, and the air grew thick with tension. I could feel the weight of the situation bearing down on me, and I knew I had to find a way to escape this hellish scene. The waiter's voice, now barely above a whisper, seemed to echo in my mind, and I felt my heart racing with anticipation. I glanced around the room, searching for an exit, but every door seemed to lead to more questions, more fears, and more uncertainty. My grip on the paper tightened, and I felt my knuckles turn white with anxiety. I was trapped, and I didn't know how to escape. Leo was waiting for me, and I had to protect him. From inside the ballroom, the embassy's voice cheerfully announced that they should get ready for the main course. His voice was like a cruel reminder that time was running out, and if I hesitated, a deadly trap could be waiting for Leo. I took a deep breath, trying to control the trembling in my body. I knew I couldn't stay silent. If I didn't act right now, I would never forgive myself. I returned to the ballroom with the paper still in my hand as irrefutable proof of a sinister plan. The ballroom was still flooded with candlelight, and the music of the jazz band mixed with the laughter of the guests. The waiters silently served the main courses, and the aroma of roasted meat and gravy filled the air. But for me, everything was a facade. I felt like I was living in a nightmare, and I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The smile on my face was just a disguise, hiding the turmoil that was brewing inside me. I glanced around the room, searching for any sign of danger, my eyes scanning the crowd for any suspicious activity. The paper in my hand seemed to be burning a hole in my palm, reminding me of the urgency of the situation. I knew I had to act fast before it was too late. I took a deep breath and began to make my way through the crowd, my heart pounding in my chest. The music and laughter seemed to fade into the background as I focused on my mission, my senses heightened as I navigated through the sea of people. I spotted Gloria, the host of the ball, across the room. and I knew I had to reach her before it was too late. I quickened my pace, my eyes fixed on her, my mind racing with thoughts of what I had to do. The paper in my hand was my only hope, and I was determined to use it to uncover the truth and bring the perpetrator to justice. I looked at Leo huddled next to Lucy, his clear eyes full of fear fixed on me, as if I were his only refuge in the middle of the storm. I took Leo's little hand, feeling his trembling fingers in my palm. And then, as if driven by an invisible force, I stood up abruptly. My voice resonated clearly and firmly above the music and conversations. "One moment, please, before we begin to eat. I have something to clarify." The whole ballroom fell silent, as if time had stopped. All eyes were on me, and I could feel the weight of their anticipation. I took a deep breath, trying to gather my thoughts, and began to speak, my voice unwavering. "I want to address a matter that has been on my mind for a while now, something that I believe needs to be brought to light." I glanced at Leo, who was still holding my hand, his eyes filled with a mix of fear and trust. And then I looked at Lucy, who seemed just as anxious as Leo, her eyes fixed on me with a hint of concern. The silence in the room was palpable, and I knew I had to continue to reveal the truth that had been hidden for so long. All eyes were on table 8, where I was standing with Leo by my side, and Lucy sitting with a spark of determination in her eyes. The clinking of glasses ceased. The murmurs died down, and I could only hear the pounding of my heart in my chest. I held up the paper. The words scribbled on it were an undeniable accusation. "Who wrote this paper asking for shrimp to be added to the food of the child at table 8? I asked, my voice trembling with indignation, but forcing it to be clear and sharp. Whispers began to spread like small waves in a calm lake. Some guests looked at each other, shaking their heads with looks of curiosity and confusion. I felt Leo's gaze fixed on me as if he were begging me to do something to protect him. Alex and Tom from another table caught my attention with a smile on Alex's face that quickly turned to concern when he saw my expression. "Mom, what's going on?" he asked, completely bewildered. I didn't answer him immediately. I just put the paper on the table and pushed it towards him. "Read it yourself," I said in a harsh voice, although inside I was a mess. Alex took the paper. His eyes scanned the words, and I saw his face turn pale and his hands tremble slightly. As he read, his expression changed from curiosity to shock, and he looked like he had been punched in the gut. I could see the emotions playing out on his face, and I felt a pang of guilt for being the one to cause him such distress. Alex's eyes lingered on the last sentence, and then he slowly raised them to meet mine. His gaze was searching, as if trying to find some hidden meaning or clue that would explain the words on the page. I avoided his eyes, unable to look at him, and instead focused on the floor, my heart racing with anticipation. The silence between us was oppressive, and I could feel the weight of Alex's unspoken questions bearing down on me. Finally, he broke the silence, his voice barely above a whisper. "Is this true?" he asked, his words hanging in the air like a challenge. "What does this mean?" he asked, stunned, looking at me and then at Leo, as if searching for a logical explanation. Ava, in her dazzling wedding dress, approached, frowning with a perfectly feigned surprise. "What is all this? Some kind of bad joke?" she said in a soft voice, but I noticed a flash of panic in her eyes. I looked at her directly in the eyes, my heart gripped by anger and fear. "My grandson is allergic to shrimp," I said, my voice trembling with indignation. "This is not a joke," I continued, my words echoing through the ballroom. "This is an attempt at murder," I accused, my eyes locked on the person responsible. My words fell like thunder, plunging the ballroom into a deathly silence. Some guests' mouths dropped open in astonishment, while others began to whisper, their eyes moving from me to Ava, who was standing frozen, her face pale with fear. Ava's eyes darted to mine, pleading for help, but I stood firm, my anger and concern for my grandson's safety taking over. The room was filled with an uncomfortable tension, and I could feel the weight of the guests' gaze on me, waiting to see what I would do next. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself down, but my mind was racing with thoughts of how someone could be so reckless and irresponsible. Ava slowly began to move towards me, her eyes never leaving mine, as if searching for a way to diffuse the situation. But I was beyond consolation, my anger and worry for my grandson's well-being boiling over. And I knew that I had to take action to protect him. Ava let out a forced laugh, a mask to maintain her composure. "Excuse me, Miss Williams, but there is no name on the paper. Are you going to believe a story that a child who found it made up?" she said with a mocking tone, trying to make me look like a paranoid old woman. Some guests began to comment doubtfully, their voices whispered among themselves, fueling the skepticism that Ava had sparked. I stood firm, my eyes locked on Ava as I replied, "I assure you, the story behind this paper is quite real, and I'm willing to prove it," my voice steady and calm, despite the growing unease in the room. Ava raised an eyebrow, a hint of amusement dancing on her lips as she said, "Oh, I'm intrigued. Do tell. What makes you think this story is true?" The guests leaned in, their faces filled with anticipation, eager to hear my response. Maybe it's a misunderstanding, but the very thought of it made my blood boil in my veins. Ava's audacity left me almost speechless, and I couldn't help but wonder who would do something like that at a wedding. A day that was supposed to be filled with joy and love. As I stood there, my mind racing with questions and my heart filled with anger, I wanted to scream, to shout out the truth and tear off that wedding dress to reveal the lies that lay beneath. The atmosphere was tense, and I could feel my emotions getting the better of me, but I knew I had to keep my cool, for now, and figure out what to do next. Ava, with her sweet smile and innocent eyes, seemed to be enjoying the attention. But I knew better, and I was determined to expose her true nature, no matter the cost. The wedding, which was supposed to be a celebration of love and commitment, had turned into a tangled web of deceit and betrayal, and I was not going to let it go unnoticed. But I knew I had to remain calm for Leo, for my family. Suddenly, Lucy stood up, hugging Leo tightly. Her eyes gleamed and fixed on Ava. "That's enough, Ava," she said, her voice sounding cold, but full of pain, as if she couldn't contain herself any longer. Lucy stepped forward and slapped her, a smack that echoed throughout the ballroom. The deafening sound broke the silence and the falsehood. Everyone froze, including me. Ava put a hand to her cheek, her eyes wide with shock, and then turned to Alex, sobbing. "You see, she's crazy with jealousy, and that's why she's attacking me. What have I done to deserve this?" Lucy didn't back down, her fists clenched and her voice broken with anger. Alex, taken aback by the scene unfolding before him, tried to intervene. But Ava's words cut him off. "How could you, Lucy, after everything I've done for you?" Ava's voice trembled with hurt and betrayal. Lucy's face reddened, her eyes flashing with defiance. "I don't need your charity, Ava, and I certainly don't need your condescending attitude." The air was thick with tension as the two women faced off, their animosity palpable. I stood there, frozen in uncertainty, as the drama unfolded before me. Alex, sensing the escalating situation, stepped forward, his hands raised in a calming gesture. "Ava, stop, please, just listen to me." But Ava's emotions had reached a boiling point, and she was beyond reason. She turned on her heel and stormed out of the room, leaving the rest of us in stunned silence. "The only wicked person here is you," a fact that echoes through the air like a cold, harsh breeze. "You wanted to harm an innocent child at your own wedding, a despicable act that defies all sense of decency and morality." The words cut through the heavy air of the ballroom like a knife, leaving a trail of shock and disgust in their wake. The looks of doubt began to center on Ava, and I saw her freeze, her false smile fading like a fleeting shadow. Alex, too, was motionless, his eyes fixed on you with a mixture of horror and disdain. the weight of your cruel intentions settling upon him like a physical burden. The atmosphere in the room had turned glacial, the air thick with tension and revulsion, as if the very presence of wickedness had sucked the joy and happiness out of the occasion, leaving only a stark, unsettling sense of dread. His gaze went from me to Lucy and Ava, as if he were torn between two worlds. "Lucy, calm down," he said in a trembling voice, but I knew he was no longer sure who to believe. The murmurs of the guests grew like a tide that carried all eyes toward me, toward Ava, and toward Leo, my little grandson, who was trembling in Lucy's arms. Ava tried to maintain her false calm, but I saw her hands shake when she spoke. "This is a slander," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, but filled with a conviction that made my heart ache. Leo's eyes, wide with fear, darted from his mother to Ava, and then to me, as if searching for reassurance that everything would be okay. My heart went out to him, and I wanted to shield him from the ugliness that was unfolding before us. The room seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for someone to say something, to do something, to break the tension that had settled over us like a shroud. And then, without warning, Lucy spoke up, her voice clear and calm, but with an underlying anger that made me shiver. "Tell them, Ava," she said, her eyes locked on Ava's. "Tell them the truth." Ava's eyes flashed with defiance, but I saw the fear lurking behind them, and I knew that she was trapped, caught between her loyalty to Lucy and her own sense of self-preservation. The air was thick with anticipation, as if everyone was waiting for Ava to say something, to reveal a secret that would change everything. But Ava just stood there, her mouth opening and closing, as if she was searching for the right words, the words that would set her free. "I'm sure someone put that paper there to ruin our wedding." His voice was sharp, but I noticed the panic in his eyes, as if his perfect mask was starting to crack. I couldn't stand his audacity anymore. The anger inside me exploded like a fire that consumed all my patience. I hit the table hard, making the glasses shake. "That's enough," I shouted in a voice so cold that it silenced even the music of the jazz band. "David, come here." The young waiter, David, approached from a corner, his face pale with fear. His eyes darted from side to side, as if he were trapped between the truth and the storm that was coming. I showed him the paper, my voice trembling but firm. "Confirm it, David," I demanded. My eyes locked on his, searching for any sign of deception. The dim lighting of the club seemed to fade into the background as I awaited his response, the only sound being the soft hum of the band's instruments, now muted and still. David's eyes dropped, and he nodded slowly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, it's true," he said, the words hanging in the air like a challenge. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I realized the implications of what he was saying. The music, the crowd, the entire scene seemed to melt away, leaving only David and I, suspended in a moment of raw truth. "Is this the paper you received?" David nodded repeatedly, stuttering. "Yes, ma'am, it is. A woman from the other table gave it to me, and I accidentally dropped it when I was carrying the tray." He lowered his head as if he wanted to avoid my gaze. I felt my blood boil, but I forced myself to stay calm because I knew everyone in the ballroom was watching. Ava hurried to interrupt in a sharp, almost desperate voice. "You're mistaken." "I don't know anything about that." But before she could respond, a weak voice full of pain was heard from behind. Gloria, Ava's younger sister, burst into tears and stood up from her chair. "It wasn't my sister Ava who gave me that paper," the young woman said, trembling as tears ran down her cheeks. "She asked me to give it to the waiter. I swear I didn't know what was inside." A murmur of astonishment ran through the ballroom. My God, I thought, I couldn't believe it. Maya's eyes widened in shock as she turned to me, her face pale. "What's going on, Gloria?" she whispered, her voice shaking. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself down, and began to explain the situation to her. As I stood there, frozen in shock, I couldn't help but feel a surge of compassion for Gloria, whose delicate features seemed to be etched with worry. Her eyes, wide and brimming with tears, sparkled like diamonds in the faint light, and her petite frame seemed to tremble with each passing moment. Ava, on the other hand, was a stark contrast, her face twisted in a scowl, her voice rising to a near shriek as she turned on her sister. "Shut up, Gloria," she spat, her words dripping with venom, her eyes flashing with anger. Gloria's eyes darted towards me, and I could sense her desperation, her plea for help, as she took a step back, her hands raised in a defensive gesture. The air was thick with tension, and I knew I had to intervene, to calm the situation before it escalated further. I took a deep breath, my eyes locked on Gloria's, and began to speak, my voice low and soothing, in an attempt to diffuse the anger that seemed to be simmering just below the surface. "How dare you make up lies to harm your own sister?" Her voice was sharp, but I saw her lips tremble as if she were struggling to hide the truth. Gloria backed away, trembling from head to foot, and said between sobs, "I'm not lying, sister. I just did what you asked." Her words were like a dagger that went through Ava's falsehood, leaving the entire ballroom in a state of shock. A close old relative shook his head, his voice choked. How is it possible to not even spare an innocent child? In the midst of the chaos, Lucy stepped forward, hugging Leo tightly, and said in an icy voice, "If you keep denying it, we can ask to check the security cameras in the ballroom. Everything will be cleared up in a moment." Her words were like a stone thrown into a lake, causing waves of panic. Ava's face turned ashen, her lips tightened, and her gaze desperately sought an escape. But there was no escape now. She didn't say another word, and that silence for me was the clearest confession of all. Alex froze, his hand trembling on Leo's shoulder, looking into the eyes of the woman he had just called his wife, Ava. His voice broke as if he were trying to cling to the hope that it was all a misunderstanding. But his gaze, moving from the paper to Leo, said it all. I saw how his heart broke, just like mine had when he discovered the plot. And Uncle stood up and shook his head, disgusted. "It's unbelievable," I thought, as the weight of the moment settling in. Such wickedness on a day of celebration, a day that was supposed to be filled with joy and laughter, not anger and betrayal. His voice trembled as if he were holding back his indignation, the words struggling to escape his lips. After Lucy's challenge about the security cameras, a deadly silence took over the ballroom, the air thick with tension. Ava, the woman I once tried to accept as part of my family, stood there, her face pale and her lips pressed together, looking for one last excuse, a last-ditch effort to justify her actions. The room seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for her response, as the silence stretched out like an eternity. Jack's eyes narrowed, his gaze fixed intently on Ava, his expression a mixture of disappointment and outrage. Ava's eyes darted around the room, searching for an escape, a way to deflect the attention, but it was too late. The damage was done. The trust was broken, and it could never be repaired. But the truth was exposed, and she had nowhere left to run. Alex, my son, walked slowly towards her, his face tense and his eyes red, and asked her, "Ava, tell me the truth. Is it true?" His voice trembled as if he were begging for a glimmer of hope that it was all a mistake. But I knew that deep down he also felt the painful truth. Ava took a step back, trying to force a twisted smile, but her eyes betrayed her panic. She struggled to find the right words, but the silence was deafening, and the air was thick with the weight of her deception. Alex's eyes never left hers, his gaze piercing through her very soul, as if searching for any sign of denial or justification. But Ava's expression only revealed the depth of her guilt, and the silence between them grew more oppressive, until finally Alex spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. "Ava, how could you?" As I gazed into her eyes, I saw a deep desperation, a pleading for me to trust her, to believe that she wasn't capable of such deceit. But the words that came out of her mouth, "It's all their plan," sounded more like a faint cry for help, a last attempt to salvage what was left of our crumbling relationship. Alex's trust, once a flame that burned bright and true, was now dwindling, flickering in the winds of doubt and uncertainty. I felt my heart sink, weighed down by the burden of her supposed betrayal, and the pain that followed was like a stormy sea, crashing against the shores of my soul. This woman I thought would bring my son happiness was now standing in front of me like a stranger, a danger I hadn't seen before. Lucy, my adopted daughter, put a hand on Alex's shoulder and said in a voice she was holding back with all her might, "Leo almost died because of this woman." Her words were as sharp as a knife. Ava yelled desperately, "Shut up, you're just a jealous intruder." But Lucy didn't move. She was trembling with age, but stood firm like a shield for Leo. "How dare you call me jealous?" Lucy responded in an icy voice. "Look this child in the eyes and tell me you didn't try to hurt him." Leo clung to me, his little hands squeezing mine, as if he feared being dragged into that nightmare. The guests began to stand up. The festive atmosphere had completely broken. A relative of our family, Mr. Johnson, hit the table with anger. "This is a disgrace," he exclaimed, his face red with rage. The room fell silent, with all eyes on Mr. Johnson, as he glared at the person responsible for ruining the evening. Mrs. Johnson, his wife, tried to calm him down, but he was having none of it. "How could you do this to our family?" he shouted, his voice echoing through the hall. The atmosphere was now tense and uncomfortable, with everyone waiting to see what would happen next. We can't let this go. Moments of support were few, with everyone's looks of contempt weighing heavily on Alex, like waves that ebbed and flowed, each one crashing down on Ava. Alex, torn between truth and love, cried out, his voice broken with pain and indignation. "Leo is my son," he said, his words laced with accusation. "You tried to kill my son at our own wedding, a day that was supposed to be filled with joy and celebration, not violence and betrayal." The memory of that day still haunted him, and the thought of what could have been was still too much to bear. Alex's eyes locked onto Ava's, his gaze piercing and unyielding. "How could you do that to our child, to our family?" he asked, his voice shaking with emotion. "You, who were supposed to be the one I trusted most in this world." The pain and the anger were still raw, still fresh, and Alex couldn't help but wonder if their relationship could ever be the same again. His words were like a direct stab to Ava's heart, and I saw her burst into tears. But those tears, I knew, were not of repentance, but of being discovered. I placed the paper on the table and declared in a firm voice, "Anyone who tries to harm my grandson will never have the right to set foot in this family." My words resonated clear and unyielding, like a sentence. Ava looked up, her eyes full of fire, but I saw defeat in her gaze. She had lost not only to me, but to the truth. The hotel security personnel approached and in a polite but firm manner asked Ava to leave the ballroom. "Ma'am, please come with us," one of them said in a cold voice. Ava backed away looking for help, but no one sided with her. Many guests shook their heads, leaving their half-empty glasses and sighing with resignation. "Unbelievable," one whispered. "How can someone be so cruel?" another said, horrified. Alex stood motionless, his hands on his head, as if trying to keep his world from collapsing. Then, as if he no longer had the strength to stand, he slowly knelt in front of Leo, his voice choked. "Son, forgive me. Forgive me, my boy, for not protecting you." His eyes welled up with tears as he gazed at Leo, his face etched with regret and sorrow. Leo's eyes, however, were empty, his expression a mask of pain and betrayal. Alex's words hung in the air, a desperate plea for forgiveness, but Leo's silence was deafening. Alex's body shook with sobs, his head bowed in shame as he whispered again, "Forgive me, Leo. Forgive me." I saw tears running down Alex's cheeks, and I felt my heart break in two. I helped Alex get up, squeezing his shoulders, and said in a grave but confident voice, "Luckily, we stopped it in time. This false happiness has to end here and now." I looked at Ava, who was being escorted out amidst looks of contempt, and in my heart I knew that she never was and never would be a part of this family. In the days that followed that nightmare wedding, my family was caught in a silent whirlwind where wounds still bled and unanswered questions floated in the air. I felt as if I had just woken up from a nightmare in which I almost lost Leo, my grandson, whom I love more than life itself. The story of the failed wedding spread everywhere, from the small suburban streets to the conversations of distant relatives. The house phone wouldn't stop ringing. Some blamed Alex for blindly trusting Ava. https://www.youtube.com. As I looked at Leo, I saw the pain and confusion in his eyes, a feeling that I couldn't bear to see my beloved grandson endure. The sound of the ringing phone seemed to fade into the background as I tried to process the events that had transpired, my mind struggling to come to terms with the fact that Ava's deceit had almost destroyed our family's happiness. But for me, every call was just a painful reminder of what we had gone through. Alex became withdrawn after what happened. He was no longer the confident man in the navy blue suit from the wedding day. Instead, he would take Leo to and from school in silence every day, his gaze filled with pain and guilt.